Welcome to another episode of the Shift with Elena Agar Podcast. In this conversation, I am joined by Jeremy Blain. He is a thought leader at the forefront of organizational transformation. Jeremy is here to challenge the longstanding notions about leadership, emphasizing that the smartest people in the room have not been leaders for a long time. Together, we delve deep into the critical mindset shift and restructuring needed within organizations to pivot towards performance support. We also explore the pressing need for leaders to focus on individual well-being, the importance of empathy towards employees, customers, and the planet, and the challenges leaders face in adapting to a rapidly digitalized world. Jeremy also shares his personal journey, including a transformative experience with a medical burnout, and underscores the value of asking oneself, "Am I happy?" Especially those in leadership roles. Tune into this conversation, and as always, subscribe, comment, share, and let me know what you think. Jeremy, welcome to the Shift Podcast.
Thanks very much, Elena. Good to be here.
So tell me a little bit more about, the work that you're doing today, for my audience to get an idea of who you are. What is it that you're passionate about, and what value we're going to gain from this conversation today?
Well, my focus right now has been narrowed since, I suppose, the last 5 years when I've moved from a generalist to a specialist, more around transforming businesses and leaders for the digital world. That's where I play. So transformational leadership, but in line with digital transformation, workforce transformation, and the needed leader shift, as I would call it, that needs to happen with many of our leaders, particularly legacy 20th century leaders. So I do a lot of research behind that, and that research informs not just my consulting with my clients, but also what I do and what I offer. I'm very much, as a learning professional, as much as a leader myself, very much a voice in our industry, if you like, in the learning industry, the development industry, is that we need to do better. We can't just pump out the same old stuff that we've been doing for years and calling it a modern leadership program. So for me, I kind of live and breathe that and walk the talk a bit. So I'm very passionate about that, which is why I invest in the in research, but also why I do a lot of speaking on it as well and writing on the topic.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting you say, like, we really just need to do something different and something better, and let's just try something different. So what do you think we've been getting wrong as an industry, as a collective, about leadership development?
The same thing as where organizations are failing in their transformation. We're not implementing what we're preaching enough. So we say that learning is changing. We say that the landscape for learning out there is changing, that we need new skills as well as refined skills. So from my point of view, we're not doing a very good job of unlearning some of the things that we might used to have done in the 20th century, which are okay, but need a bit of a reshine, if you like. And then we're not learning the new things that we need. For example, how we lead and manage in a digital world with a dispersed team, remote teams, how we drive collaborative work groups, how we adopt agile, how we, at all levels, how we use data better to make decisions quicker, how we innovate throughout the organization. All of these things aren't really touched in the traditional sort of learning approach for leaders, as far as I can see out there. So we're doing a disservice. But there are the greatest hits of leadership. So we're not throwing everything out. We do have to bring things forward. And things like being more emotionally intelligent, being more empathy driven with our people. It's part of human-centered leadership these days, and where we need to be in the digital world. There's no substitute for the human touch. And my dog's barking. I'm not sure if you can pick that up.
No, we can't hear, but it's okay.
Very good.
We love
Very
dogs
good
around here.
microphone audio technica. Thank you. So those things, but so we bring those greatest hits forward, but we have to relearn things, because some of the skill sets that we still need as leaders need to be kind of, I would call it, 1 degree off a little bit. So I know how to lead and manage my team, but do I know how to lead and manage them in the virtual space or in the remote world?
What do you think is the root cause of this challenge that we have of learning and unlearning and relearning? What is the root? Like, why is it so difficult?
The root cause is that often we don't like change. So we talk a good game, but we don't often implement and walk the talk. But that's where many strategies fail. 67% of strategies fail, according to the Strategy Implementation Institute. And it's exactly the same when we talk about our own individual changes as well. We really have to make an effort. And it starts with a mindset shift. If the mindset shift isn't there, particularly as I talk about leadership learning at that level, then it's just simply not going to happen. And those leaders are going to become more and more reliant on the rest of their organization. And then it becomes a top down. I need this, I need that, I need somebody to do this for me. And it starts to hijack the whole organization instead of embracing what I see at the moment is that leaders have, which is probably the most steepest learning curve of all in our organizations.
Hmm. You know what's interesting? I was reading a report. It was really recent that came out. I don't remember if it was Gallup or I forget the entity that released it, but they were saying that 2%, only 2% of CHROs, so Chief Human Resources Officers globally, believe that their leadership performance kind of model is actually working. 2%, and these are like global corporate kind of organizations. And 85% of people leaders said that, yeah, like our leadership approach is just really bad. But to your point, it's so hard to make that change. But it seems like collectively we agree that this something's wrong. Like something has to change. But where does one start? Is it on individual level? Is it a system level? Where do you start?
It's mindset. Is simple as that.
Mm,
It's the attitude, and changing minds is the hardest thing to do in business. You know, we can
yeah.
bring in all the technology we want. We can bring in all of these great new kind of events that we get people sort of energized by. We make such a big kind of fuss about we're doing this and we're going to drive it forward. Then everybody goes back to their desks and kind of says, "Well, what was all that about? I've heard it all before. It'll never happen. I'll just wait for somebody else to do something." If it's not led by the leaders of the organization and they can't see that leaders are walking the talk, then the rest of the organization looks at it and say, well, why should I bother? Because it's just words again. So I know what's going to happen. It's all going to come down to me because I'm capable. So I'm going to have increased workload, and people are going to say, you know, you're very good at what you do. We want to expand your role a little bit, and you want to take on that and that and the other because you're capable. But my argument is going up the line is let's get more leaders who are capable in strategic and operational leadership roles.
Mm. If you were to choose two topics that you would want those leaders to kind of really be experts on, what would those be?
What leading in a digital world now looks like. So, what are the skill sets that they need to understand what is largely unknown? So, being comfortable with the uncomfortable kind of plugs into that. That's all part of being a digital leader, knowing what to do when you don't know what to do. I certainly know that I'm learning probably just ahead of some of my more enlightened clients because I'm meant to be the one that's teaching it. But you know, you look
Mm,
at generative AI, Web3, micro enterprises, um, monolith to micro architectures in digital. All of these things need to be known by leaders, but it's the undiscovered country. So that is a big topic in itself because you know all of that you know comes with a huge amount of different categories where the leader has to get some knowledge behind. They don't need mastery, but they need to know and understand it. The second element is on the human side because this is the time where human-centered leadership seems to be more important than ever. Employees have more power, they've got more power of choice. They're looking for their leaders to be something different, to demonstrate empathy, not just for them and their business and their customers, but also for the planet and for societies and the communities within which we serve. So, being purpose driven, for example, or really embracing sort of ESG and social development goals so that it actually blends in what your employees want and what your customers want to see of you with how the organization moves forward. So, understanding those human needs and how the workforce transformation is driving a different kind of set or suite of requirements from employees is really important. For example, Generation Z, as they're coming into the workplace, many that we have interviewed for our leadership surveys have talked about, I don't want a career for life. I just want to come in and I want to do 2 years, but I want to be fulfilled. I want to have a meaningful job role. I don't want to be told what to do or get pigeonholed into a particular role doing a particular thing. I want to be empowered. I'll give you it all, but you've got to give me some help back. Our organization's leaders and human capital leaders aren't prepared for this.
Yeah. Yeah, the generational piece is a very interesting, and it's and I think part of it is like a chicken and egg, because if a lot of leaders, considering that we're very reactive as a society versus proactive, they're looking at this and they say, why am I going to invest in this young person, right? Why am I going to give them what they want when they're just going to leave in 2 years? Right? Like that's the other piece of it. But it's, and I mean, I think we're aligned on the fact that's like, well, but you're going to get the best out of them in those 2 years, versus you might get mediocre performance in the 2 years versus high productivity. And I think because it's hard to see and it's not tangible, maybe that's where a lot of leaders are hesitant to be like, well, why am I investing resources in developing and training and leadership and all of that? Because that's the biggest budget to be cut whenever whenever the budgets go down, that's the first budget, because it's a nice to have. But from what I'm hearing from you is like it's a must have. And I'm curious, what is the cost of inaction? What is the cost of not investing in these things ultimately?
So if I go back one step, first of all, and just pick up the point is that, we're not ready in our organizations to embrace something like this. Our systems around human capital and workforce are born in the 20th century, even in new organizations that are trying to reinvent the wheel. So the way that we recruit traditional HR personnel, I just don't see the shift enough, and I don't see a framework which is fit for purpose out there. To the extent that I'm actually creating one called Open HR, which is proposing a framework that actually fits the new breed of workforce that we've got, not just those people that want to work, maybe for 2 years, let's say, but the rest of the shift in the workforce transformation, which many leaders are unaware of, which is the rise of the blended workforce, formalizing independent workers and permanent workers working together as valued employees for the first time, not managed services, but actually part of your employee set. Again, there isn't a framework for that. So bringing all that together is really critical to be a modern organization from a workforce point of view. So the cost of not doing it is you're going to fail, because you're not going to attract, grow, or retain the right kind of talent, the talent that is demanding something different, because you're intransigent. You're putting roadblocks in the way. You're saying we can't do things, we can't adapt to change, and you're giving indirect signals and sometimes direct signals to people who are saying, I want to go into a more enlightened organization with great leaders who understand what I can do for them. And by the way, I want to go in just for 2 years, but you've got 2 years to change my mind.
Yeah, I'm curious, in your research that you've done, if there was anything indicating in terms of how much are organizations or leadership worry or excited or care even about AI, and how much are they preparing the workforce to, or implement some kind of talent mobility in a way that people are not going to be out of a job 2 3 years 5 years from now, that they're not going to be out of business 5 years from now. Like, how much focus and energy spend on that?
A fifth of the focus. So
Mm.
according to the research that we've done, it's 2 out of 10 leaders are getting behind this in a big way and understand it a little bit more beyond, oh, I can rewrite my emails, I can create a nice memo, I can create this, I can create a nice image to go with this, and I can play around with it a little bit, versus actually where we need to use generative AI to automate, to drive productivity, to release the human capital that we have to actually service our customers better from a human perspective, supported by appropriate technologies like Gen AI that can actually help and not get in the way of doing business, if you like. The problem that we've got at the moment is that many organizations aren't investing enough in the knowledge and the skill sets behind this. They're just kind of saying, we need a policy around ChatGPT 4, let's say, for example. And okay, so we can have a policy, you can use it, but you have to do this, that, and the other. But there is no focus on the how at the moment. There's very, very few formal trainings around the know-how and the application of generative AI in our businesses, which is tailored to a business. And one of the reasons for that is one of the biggest mistakes is for many organizations that are trying to apply Gen AI to their businesses. They're using something that's off the shelf. They're not creating their own generative AI, which is created through characters, frameworks, and prompts. So almost sits within their industry, within their business, talks like a leader in their business, acts like that as well, and starts to learn like that too. So we've got a long way to go. And it's not surprising to me, therefore, that just kind of, 20% of leaders are even making progress on this.
Yeah, it's very it's just, as I talk to you and many other people that are really kind of educated in the space, and I'm just mind blown. And when I read reports and I'm like, why? Like, it should be a no-brainer. And then it brings me back to this whole idea of empathy, right? Like, that's, I think, if we were just a little bit more in tune and empathetic, maybe we would actually spend more time on things like this, because then we would actually care about the workforce, care about the future of our employees, right? Because that's essentially what we want to be able to do for them, right? And then they in return are productive and high performing
Yeah.
parts of our organizations. It's just, I don't have a question here. It's just a comment of how astonishing it is that we're not, you know what I mean? It's
I know exactly what you mean, because we can become obsessed. We've seen that before with previous technologies, where we've had systems rollouts. Let's say beyond where we need to be now. It's like, oh, we've got SAP coming in, or we've got HR management system coming in, and they become individual systems which aren't necessarily connected to the rest of the business, which causes a massive upheaval and change project internally, but nothing's connected. So now part of that digital challenge is, how do we create ecosystems with appropriate technology which helps us serve our customers better, including our internal customers, our employees? Because the atomic unit of your business is not a number or an AI, it's a person. And if we can unleash the power of the person by applying appropriate technology where it's needed, connected to other technologies, whereby we can be more data driven and make decisions at all levels, then we can become much more agile as an organization. We can become more customer focused, and we can become more innovative ahead of our competition. So it's a long way to go for many organizations here, because the next digital transformation is just around the corner, Web3. And for those that are struggling with the digital transformation 1.0, are going to find it really tough.
if a leader is listening to this and they're saying, like, listen, I hear you, Jeremy, like, excellent points, but I'm looking at my calendar and I'm looking at the next, several weeks, and I don't know where I can find the time to even pause and, you know, think about this or bring awareness, or, maybe I don't yet see a problem with it yet, in my organization. What do you tell that leader? Where do they start in baby steps?
Well, if it's a leader talking to me there, I would challenge them right back and say, you're probably too operational, you're too short term, you're looking at numbers every month rather than what's our long-term growth ambitions, because we've been locked in that cycle. We're not transforming quick enough, therefore we're really pressured with our numbers. Our competitors existing and new, are stealing a march against us, and we're just fighting fires. That's where actually a lot of leaders are kind of finding themselves. So they're in the middle of the operational sort of firefighting, and their head never kind of comes up above the parapet to say, well, actually, what's next? Or what if we did something different? So just those two questions, what if, what next, are never asked. And if they keep doing that, they're not practicing good management. They're practicing damagement, if you like. That's not a word, but it seems to fit right now. Because it's not only damaging themselves and creating a lot of anxiety in themselves and putting a lot of pressure on themselves, it's impacting others who are looking at their leaders thinking, what the heck's going on with our organization? We're not even talking about the future, and look at that competitor or that competitor. I think I'll go and join them. So, the steps are to demonstrate both sides of the same coin, one being vulnerability and one being courage as a leader. Vulnerability, say, you know what, I don't have all the answers, I don't know everything, I need help. And then the courage to pause, the courage to stop and rethink how we move forward as an organization. One of the biggest barriers to that is being locked in, if you like, this might sound odd, but being locked in traditional capitalism. Traditional capitalism may be just kind of locked into shareholder value. So we're obsessed with giving our shareholders dividends, and we become less obsessed with our customers and even less obsessed with our employees. We don't think about stakeholders versus shareholders. I'm talking to you from the UK, and if you've seen the news, most of our water companies are privatized, and most of the shares are owned by rich individuals outside of the UK. There's no interest for the UK, so our infrastructure hasn't been updated. There is sewage in our rivers, old pipes, all this, and yet £70 billion, which is, I don't know, what's that in real money, $110,000, I don't know, of dividends have been paid over the last 10 years and not gone back into the system. And we as citizens are going, what the heck is going on? And now we're being said, well, if you want all this to happen now, you're going to have to pay more and your rates are having to go up. So it's shareholders above stakeholders, if you like, as well. That's just one of the symptoms of that, I would say.
Yeah, it seems like a very complex challenge. But again, I think just starting with just that individual pause is probably something leaders can really focus on. And it is lonely and it is hard to do those things on your own. And I think asking for help, there's nothing wrong with that. But also maybe embedding this notion of ownership across the organization. And you have this concept of inner CEO. So talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the my point being there, Elena, is that one CEO, one leader is not enough for all of those reasons I've just talked about there. Leaders are drowning in the transformational leadership survey we did last year in 2023. It wasn't just the leaders who are failing, which was the worry. The kind of the poor leaders, they weren't changing their mind. They're a bit apathetic. They're saying things like, it's not my problem, I'm going to retire in a couple of years. We found that 41% of the capable leaders are saying, if things don't change by the end of 2025, I'm leaving. I cannot cope anymore. I've got an increase in mental health issues. I'm more anxious. I can't cope with the work I'm doing, and I'm being asked to do more because I'm capable and because I can. But these are the leaders that are voting with their feet, and I include myself in one of those. I left my previous business because I didn't agree with the direction that we're going. I was part of the leadership team. I didn't agree with the direction that we were going. And the last thing I wanted to do was be the person to pick up those pieces and try and transform it sort of 10 years later, if you like. So I think that piece for me is, first of all, we are not doing a service to our leaders. We're not giving them the help that they really need, and we're not challenging up the line, or we're not being more empathetic up the line as we're demanding our leaders to be empathetic down the line as well. So we need to practice what we preach with leaders and understand that they're human too. I think that's the first thing, because one of those people who are very capable, it's simply not enough. So for me, I've written extensively we've talked about empowerment, distributed leadership, leading at all levels. You call it what you want, for many, many, many years now. In fact, I went back and tried to look at some references. The earliest that I found was something like 1902 in a book called Vesalius in Zante. I haven't read it, but it talked about empowerment, and it talked about actually the reflected benefits for a leader when you unleash, if you like, the power of a person and give them more room to be empowered. But 120 years later, we're still talking about it and still not getting it right. There are very few organizations that do it formally well. So I remember this very clearly. I went to a publisher and said, look, I've got a great idea for a leadership book. And they asked me, do you know how many leadership books are on Amazon kind of every year? And I answered, oh, well, it must be a few hundred. Elena, do you know? Do you know how many?
No, I don't.
Over 57,000
Wow.
leadership books. So when I said I've got a new a new leadership book, their eyes rolled back into the back of their head. And then I said something that I shouldn't when they replied, "Oh yeah, but there are so many leadership books." I said, "Ah yeah, but mine's different." and then they said, "Oh, we've never heard that before." But then I went into it and I said, "Look, here's what I'm thinking." They said, "Look, you've got to go and do a bit of research around this." So there's 57 leadership books on leadership and management. And while leadership and management principles link to a sense of empowerment and being a leader at my level, there is no blueprint out there that actually does it. I found zero books, zero blueprints for how to do it. Found plenty of articles, plenty of case studies about organizations that had done it with certain teams. So I realized I had to take this responsibility myself and write the book. And it's called Unleash the Inner CEO, Make Distributed Leadership a Reality. And that is my belief that we need to unleash the potential in our people outside of how we used to do it, if you like, from this 20th century mentality where we would talk about talent with a capital T to mean the chosen few who'd be on a fast track program, let's say. I'm talking about talent with a small t, the many, not the few. And the fact that there is a narrowing of capability gaps in our organizations, because I've already talked about the fact that leaders need to go on a very steep learning curve, but you've got new generations coming in, you've got existing generations learning at a far greater rate in terms of how to do business in this world. So there's a capability gap that is not as high as it was. Leaders in some areas know just as much or less than their people. And that's probably the first time in history in many ways. Although I would argue that leaders have not been the smartest people in the room for some years now. And it's a question of removing the pride. So I set about doing that to create what I called Enroll CEOs, but I realized I had to do it from the ground up. How do you do it? How do you change the mindset, which is where we started, around this, because it's not just about the words. You have to create the climate in the organization, the structures. You have to break down hierarchies. You have to repurpose management and leadership away from performance supervision and into performance support. And you have to put all of that in place before you even do anything with your potential enroll CEOs. Then you have to give them room to move and grow and learn. You have to give them room to experiment, to fail a little bit, to have coaching, to improve, to learn, to create the leadership skills that they might need if they're leading teams or leading project tasks. But the key point is that we now have many of the organization looking at both strategic and operational challenges or opportunities, and you've got more brilliant minds and actions behind them to go quicker, to go more successfully, and to learn as we go to inform how we do this moving forward. So it creates that environment whereby everybody starts to thrive either within their role, even just being smarter in their role, or beyond it for those that have stretch while contributing at more strategic level.
In your research, are there any good news that we have gotten better at? Something around organizational development or leadership? Is there anything that we've gotten? I don't know. Is there any light at the end of this tunnel?
Yeah, there's always light at the end of the tunnel. I think the two key pieces of research I've done, the transformational leadership research I've done, and then one this year in 2024 called digital leadership, which is what is the state of our digital transformations and how are leaders doing that? There is definitely progress, but the biggest shift that we saw in the transformational leadership survey is that we've now moved from awareness of some of these issues and challenges to acknowledgement that things need to change. Now, that is the mindset shift. that I'm talking about, the awareness to acknowledgement. And then it's a much easier journey to get to these small action steps that you need, because you can't do everything. You have to then create a step by step. So what do we need to do? What do we need to do as leaders? What do we need to do with everybody else in the organization? So I would say there's more readiness now than when we did the first surveys of these flavors, if you like, about 5 years ago. So things have moved on. And of course, the pandemic has accelerated that thinking, because that was probably the biggest lever around digital transformation progress since the iPhone came out. And it's building the momentum behind that. But I still worry that a lot of the leaders that are leading this, even the capable ones, aren't being given the support, the human touch, the tools that they need back to keep them fueled up and energized and to cope over the next 2 years. That's going to be the biggest or next epidemic, if you like, which is the leadership drain from our organizations.
You know what's interesting? I've been attending a couple of different conferences, and last one was ATD, so Association for Talent Development, in New Orleans just a couple of weeks ago, and there was a lot of focus on kind of that well-being aspect and that pausing aspect. And Daniel Pink spoke at it as well, and his whole thing is like, start asking instead of how, like, why are you doing what you're doing, and just like as an organization, as a leader, right, as an individual. But also he was really pushing this, take care of yourself, like take a break, take a moment type thing, and I think that's what, because I think that's if I were to go down even to the change piece, change is difficult, right? Like you said, that's the root causes. It's difficult to make a change, but until we actually on an individual level pause and reflect and have that discussion with our own selves about what do I need to change, what kind of leader I need to become. But I think part of it is we're so busy doing that we don't even pausing, and we're just in this groupthink, with in this cycle of just reacting and reacting. And because it's working, because we still have businesses, they might be struggling and our employees might be burnt out and mental health is declining, but hey, we're just going to keep this rolling, because what's happening, that groupthink that I mentioned, everybody's feeling that way, all the organizations, that's how everybody operates. And I think that's a big part of it. So it's to your point, when you started, you're like, we talk about it, but are we actually making a change? And it's like there's a lot of people ringing the bells and the warning bells, so to say, like yourself and many others. But it's I really hope people listen.
Well, there is a big movement in the one of the pieces of research I was referring to before, is the big movement from a leadership perspective is away from we and first to me. So that is, it reflects exactly what you just said there, Elena, which is I have to focus on myself.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, I'm going to be useless for anybody else, because I'm working hard and I'm being successful now. But the key question I'm asking myself is, am I going to make a breakthrough or am I going to break down? And which comes first? Because I might see breakthroughs there and I might do exactly what you're saying. No, I'm going to keep going, keep going. It's, maybe next week, maybe next month, maybe next year. But by the time I get there, I'm burnt out and I'm no
Mm-hmm.
good for good for anything. So the focus is back on we, and the focus, particularly for our organization, should be the mental health of our leaders as much as everybody else in the organization, because we've been focused a lot on we through the pandemic and so on. But this is what I'm saying. I'm arguing that we're not focusing enough on our leaders at the very top here. And those leaders need to be a little bit more open to say, you know what, I am struggling a bit here.
Mm. Very interesting insights. Before I ask you my last question, where can people find you? Where they can order your book? Where do you hang out at the most?
LinkedIn is where I hang out the most. So just look up Jeremy Blain, and you'll see me there. And I can get, if that's in the show notes as well, then
Yep.
you'll have the link for that. And you can get my book, which is Unleash the Inner CEO: Make Distributed Leadership a Reality, at any bookstore that you like. So online, anywhere. So just go on. Amazon's a good one. Just type it in, and it will pop up for you as well for there. And then my sort of core business is performanceworks.global.
Is that a book on audio as well, or is it just hard?
The first edition of the book is on audio at the moment. So this is we're doing this podcast in June 2024, just in case somebody's listening in August,
Yeah.
because by the end of July 2024, the new audio book will be out and across all platforms like the previous one as well.
Excellent. And everything will be in the show notes for people who are listening but can't take notes quite at the moment. Jeremy, last question I ask all of my guests. What is one question you wish people would ask themselves more often?
Am I happy? Particularly because I work at leadership level, I think this question might be either buried in the psyche or it might be asked in subconscious or when I have a moment on my own. I know from my own experience that in 2018 I medically burnt out. I had to do exactly what I was saying to you. I had to leave my business. I was absolutely shot. I had to leave the business, the country I was living in at that point as well. Wasn't that I wasn't capable. I was a very capable leader, but I just couldn't cope anymore with that, and I couldn't face taking over the rest of the business and the transformation that was needed. But it took me 3 years to acknowledge how unhappy I really was. And happiness, or the happiness index, if you like, is really important. You can be, you know, you can be happy in what you're doing, and that's absolutely fine. And you've still got to be aware, if I'm happy in what I'm doing, that you can still experience stresses, but it's just not quite the same effect as negative stresses when you're really unhappy about what you're doing, because then everything becomes a chore. Everything becomes a real effort. And in my experience, you take it home with you as well. It affects you in your life. It takes away your personality a little bit. I mean, for me, I'm a glass half full, not half empty guy, looking on the bright side always. And boy, is that a difference when people see you kind of almost flipping on that. It's like you have a personality transplant. So I think that for me is a key question that many leaders particularly should ask themselves and be prepared to do something about if they're not happy.
I love that. Jeremy, thank you so much for the work that you're doing. Thank you for bringing awareness to this and talking about and writing about it. And I really hope people listen to this and take something away from this. And as a leader, as a future leader, or just as an individual contributor who can unleash their inner CEO, right? And I definitely took a lot from this conversation, lots of food for thought. And really, I support whatever you're doing. So let me know how I can support and promote this, the message, and being a learning space. It is something we need to really continue discussion on and actually take action. So thank you again for the work that you're doing, and keep going.
Thanks very much. Goodbye, Elena.